Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you my very first The Haunting Hour TV show episode review. Now, today I'm reviewing an episode from the show because one of my subscribers that commented on my 525 subscriber Q&A commented in my questions that they wanted a specific episode from the show reviewed if they happened to win the favorite question that I was looking for or got randomly drawn in the drawing for the two other people. And BD Manga won, so they requested that I review an episode from The Haunting Hour from Season 2, and the episode is Mascot. Now, I have the DVD here. It's The Haunting Hour, the series, Volume 6. If you turn it over on the back, you see Mascot. So this is the episode they wanted me to review. Now, to give you a fresh take on this show, because I don't think I've really talked about it on the channel, this show came out when I was in high school. And when I discovered that this show existed, I was obsessed with it. I would record this and the Spooksville show that was like short-lived. I had at least 3 to 4 seasons at one time saved up from this show on my DVR, just because I love this show so much. I don't think I really got into the final season all that much, and I think when I hopped onto it, I had to catch a lot of season 1 in reruns, but I was pretty much with it consistently from like season 2 through 5. I loved this show so much, and when BD said to review Mascot, I remembered watching this maybe once or twice, maybe 3 times. I know a handful of times I've watched this, and it's been a while since I've watched it, and I've always thought this episode was genuinely creepy and scary. Something about The Haunting Hour you need to know is that The Haunting Hour indeed is based on a short story collection, well, 2 of them technically, The Nightmare Hour and The Haunting Hour. And The Nightmare Hour was a series of 10 short stories that originally came out, I think, 1999. And then The Haunting Hour was the follow-up with 10 more short stories. Kind of similar to what Stein Tinglers is about to be this year. Stein's doing like a new volume thing with that. So I don't know if Stein Tinglers is going to become a TV show at some point. But yeah, so that's the format. And from what I believe, 9 of the Nightmare Hour short stories and only 1 of the Haunting Hour short stories from the books were turned into episodes. So majority of this show, minus 2 which were taken from other authors and other series, every single episode in this show was pretty much written for the show. And for this episode, I remember there's 2 writers for this, but I remember Craig S. Phillips was the writer, and please forgive me, I forget the other writer, but there's 2 writers on this episode. And the director, I forget their name too, but I think they've directed quite a few Haunting Hour episodes here. But the reason why I mentioned Craig S. Phillips is because you're going to see Craig S. Phillips in a handful of episodes. If you go check like IMDb and Wikipedia, he writes a lot of episodes for this show. And when I saw this episode, I kind of got a sense of what goes on in the mind of this writer. Because this episode is dark. It's kind of twisted. It's a monster-focused story. It's straight to the point. But it does have its issues, and I'll get into that near the end. But for how creative this episode was, for how eerie and creepy it felt at times, I have to give it to the Craig S. Phillips and the other writer and the director here for really pulling off something special. Big Yellow is the villain in this story. Big Yellow is super creepy. I had a fun time with it. I do have my issues. I'll get into what they are near the end of the video, but just know I had a blast with this. Okay, so let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. Now, there's not much plot to this because this episode is kind of treated like a short story setup that a Goosebumps episode would do. A lot of these episodes feel like just short story adaptation type of stories. So you don't have much character exploration. I mean, sometimes you might get that, but more than not, you're going to kind of just skim the surface with characterization and do it in subtle ways more than prolific ways, especially with a 22-minute episode. So let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away, like I said. So it starts off with these 2 kids One is named Willie and one is named Drake. And Willie and Drake are at a basketball game and they're watching their home team play. They're the Yellow Valley basketball team. I think they're like freshmen in high school. That's also another thing to note about the Haunting Hour. It's not really confined to middle grade. It's like late elementary, middle school, and even high school thrown in there. So it's kind of like Are You Afraid of the Dark in a lot of ways, where it just does different age ranges. So these like freshman kids in high school are at their home game for the Yellow Valley um, basketball team, and then comes the halftime show, and the cheerleaders kick on and do a dance with the mascot, and they put on this really old school like "Go Fight Win" song, and it's this really gross looking yellow contraption. It's tall, it has hair, it has eyes with like bloodshot rims around them. He has stains on his body. He's kind of, bigger and fat. He has really long fingernails. He doesn't really look like much of anything. And this is when they kind of talk about like how Big Yellow just looks really goofy. And I think Drake brings up the point that Yellow Valley was named after a prehistoric marsupial that used to roam the area. And that might allude to something in the story, especially about Big Yellow, but it's never really elaborated on. But anyway, they talk about how lame the mascot is and how uncool it is. They look at the bulldog from the other team. They're like, we need a new mascot. So they come up with this plan to get a petition and show it to the principal. And they get enough signatures, they can do tryouts to get a new mascot. So it cuts to them getting trying to ask the principal if it's okay to do it. And they let them know, like, hey, all we need to do is this, and we can get it done. And the principal's like, well, I don't see the problem with it. He just tells them that it's policy to let them know that if the mascot gets replaced, to let them know and say, hey, you've been kicked. So they talk to the principal about where Big Yellow came from, and he doesn't seem to know. And that's a common thing about these adults in this episode. The adults really don't know anything. The adults are absolutely useless and kind of stupid, and their stupidity kind of drives the plot forward in this story, unfortunately, but we'll just roll with it for now. So the principal guy directs them to the coach, who might know the origins behind Big Yellow. And they go speak to the coach, and the coach has no idea about who Big Yellow is. And they go speak to the equipment manager. And when they go speak to the equipment manager, he has no idea where Big Yellow came from. He said that it was there before he became equipment manager, and the former equipment manager was around when Big Yellow was around, and he went missing a while ago. They say, like, he apparently owed some money to somebody and just disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to him. So that should be like the first red flag going off in your brain when you're watching this, especially with these dumb adults not knowing anything about Big Yellow, which we haven't gotten to the point of the fun part about the mascot here. This person's disappearance, they didn't like think about what I'm about to tell you, mixed with that, and be like, oh, maybe this mascot might have something to do with it, right? So it cuts to them going down to this basement room below the gymnasium in the school, and this is where the mascot has a changing room, and it's boarded up, like really boarded up. It looks like there's like yellow lights coming through it. It looks disheveled, like nobody really should be down there, kind of thing. And they have enough petition people that have signed the paper, and they put the paper underneath the door to notify the mascot that they're going to do tryouts for a new position. And Drake has this scary interaction underneath the door where the mascot kind of pulls the paper. That was kind of a jump scare moment, and the boys decide to skedaddle because they don't want to stay around for what may happen with this mascot guy, since they know nothing about him. So then it cuts to another scene where these two kids are hosting tryouts, and they send a bunch of them home, and then this guy in a wolf costume starts breakdancing to this song, and they're like, okay, this is a cool rendition here, we like you, and that seems like the promising mascot for them. So when they think they had it all figured out and they pretty much settle on the wolf, Big Yellow comes out of nowhere with a boombox. And Big Yellow wants to try out, and Drake's like, okay, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's let him try out. It says we got to give everyone a fair shot. So Big Yellow sits the boombox down, pushes the button to his normal song, and starts dancing. And then something happens where Big Yellow gets, upset and turns it off and takes his nails and scrapes on the desk where they're sitting. And it really creeps the kids out. And they start to think that something's off about this Big Yellow person, and they just don't know what to do, right? So later that night, what happens is that it cuts to the guy in the wolf mascot costume walking home, and he's being followed by Big Yellow. And it's like two mascots like interacting, and he's like in an alley, and he is getting followed by Big Yellow, and then something may or may not happen to this kid in the wolf costume. We never really find out till later. So after a cliffhanger, when Big Yellow looks like he's about to pounce on the guy in the wolf costume, Whitley wakes up in his bed the following morning, and he finds stuffing next to him, and he looks in his bed, and it's the wolf mascot head torn to pieces in his bedding. And so he goes to school and takes a trash bag with the costume inside of it, and he shows Drake, and he's paranoid. He's like, Big Yellow must have done this. Big Yellow is jealous. The adults aren't going to help us because they don't know who this guy is. It's going to have to be us to get Big Yellow to leave and stay out of what we're trying to do, and trying to figure out who he is. So Willie gets the idea to stay after school, and Drake is really against it, but he said, you call me if you need help, because he kind of wants to stay home and just watch TV or something. So Willie stays after school to do some spying and some intel on Big Yellow. So it cuts to Willie going to Big Yellow's lair, and he opens the door, and he goes inside, and he starts exploring, and he sees all this weird things around Big Yellow's room. Everything's yellow in there. You see former basketball jerseys. You see one of the missing equipment manager's picture with a yellow X on it. You see a chicken with its head popped off, like a rubber chicken. You see a boombox, his boombox, where he, plays a song that he likes to dance to. Everything's just like yellowed up in there, school spirity, and he hears what he thinks to be Big Yellow coming down to the lair, and he accidentally bumps on the boombox, and he hides behind some barrels, and Big Yellow comes in, and you think he's gonna find the kid, but since the music's on, he just starts dancing, and then turns it off, and then takes the boombox with him and shuts the door and turns off the lights behind him. And Willie's like, okay, I'm just going to have to try to get out of here. And he tries to open the door. He realizes it's locked. And then probably the most random thing of this episode is that this yellow mustard gas comes out of this vent. And it's choking him. And he has to break the wood that's holding the door in place to break out of it so he doesn't suffocate inside of the room. And Willie's, this guy just tried to kill me. What's going on with this? And he gets angry and wants to go put a stop to it once and for all, because he wants to find out who is inside of the Big Yellow mascot costume. So he goes out to the hall, and the school is closed, mind you. All the lights are on. This would be the time that I would think to run away, but since Big Yellow kind of already knows where he lives for some reason, somehow, Willie's like, I'm just going to go try to find him. And he hears this music playing in the gym. So he goes in the gym, and there's the boombox playing. Big Yellow is just staring off into the walls of the gym, sitting on the stands, and there's a spotlight on him, and he's not moving. So Willie's like, I got you. I'm going to figure out who you are. So he goes up and nudges him. He's not moving. And then he takes his head and takes it off and realizes there's nobody in the costume. And then a twist happens where we find something out about Big Yellow. Is he alive? Is there really somebody in there? I'm not going to say. And before all this revelation, Willie may or may not have called his best friend Drake, but Drake had fallen asleep during a really loud movie and didn't hear the phone call and didn't get the text message of Big Yellow sitting in the stands of the gym. A little plot convenience there. But Drake wakes up the next morning and he sees these messages from Willie, not knowing what happened to him. And it cuts to later that night. There's a basketball game. And Big Yellow has reprised his role as the school mascot. And Drake attends the game trying to find Willie. And there's a discovery about what happened to Willie and maybe another character on top of it. I'm not going to spoil, and I'll leave you there. That's essentially the episode of Mascot. So yeah, this episode, I'll be blunt. There's some subtext of brutality in this episode. Like, it's a story essentially about provoking the bear you might get eaten. It plays on that saying a lot. I'm not saying that the saying's in the episode, but thinking on that thought, you don't want to poke the bear because bear might eat you. That's what the story essentially is. These two kids are provoking Big Yellow's position as the school mascot. Whatever this thing is, loves being the school mascot, and these two kids are trying to undermine him and get his position taken from him. Now, what the origin of this character is, I don't know, but this character is creepy. Though I don't know how they pulled off this demented Sesame Street look for this character, but it works. It's really good. Like, it creeps me out. Having a lair is really cool, even though it's kind of contrived in some ways. Like, why does a mascot have its own room, their own room underneath the school? Like, that makes no sense. But it's there. Yeah, so it's really creepy. The fact that he has a lair adds to more mystery to the character. There's a sense of urgency and legit stakes with these characters because Big Yellow's not afraid to mess up some kids that get in his way. You can definitely see the signs. Like, a lot of people have referenced this. The wolf's head being put in Willie's bed is a reference to the the horse's head in Godfather. And it's a sign of, like, just quit while you're ahead. And they just keep pressing Big Yellow. And it's one of those stories that everything that the characters did were basically for their own folly. Everything they did was their own fault. And honestly, despite the stupid adults, I think they did make some reasonable decisions given the circumstances this episode laid out. So I can be forgiving on a lot of things, but yeah, it was a really fun episode, I would say. A lot funner than most people would probably peg it just by looking at the photos of it or watching a trailer and never have watching the episode before. But I do have negatives with it. And I guess I'll start off with the adults in this episode are absolute morons. Okay? I brought this up in the overview, I mean, about these teachers. They should know who Big Yellow is. Like, there's a little thing, a little Easter egg thing in his Big Yellow's lair that shows that he has a student ID card, right? And he's been the mascot at the school for years, and nobody knows who this person really is, and nobody really cares to know. Kids have gone missing associated, with the, equipment team and all that the mascot, of course, would be in and around. You think there would be like a police investigation into this? No, nothing. All the adults are completely oblivious. There's actually a scene, right, when I kind of left it out because it's so stupid. It doesn't really matter to the story. It's probably the most filler scene in the whole episode where Drake comes back to the school after he can't find his friend, and he goes to the lair where Big Yellow would be, and there's caution tape, and the coach is there. And the coach was said, "Oh, they called me because somebody apparently broke into the mascot room." And I'm like, why would they call the gym teacher there? Why would they call the police? Like, this is such a filler scene. It literally matters diddly squat to the episode. What they could have done in that scene instead is kind of revealed like a coup d'etat moment for Drake. It could have been the teachers like solemnly saying, look, man, we got to make a sacrifice to Big Yellow. I hope you understand. We have to do this to keep him happy. That could have been like the point to do it. But what that scene just did, it just offered more filler, right? Some questionable adults, really stupid logic decisions with the adults in this episode, very noticeable. Another thing on top of it, some contrived points. It's a lot of this stuff is very padded. For example, Drake sleeping through a really loud movie while his phone's going off, his friends calling him frantically. That's straight up padding right there. How this mist ability, or there's a notion that the mascot is smart because he outwits both of these kids, and you would think that regardless of what this thing is, how is it smarter than two high school kids, right? Apparently, there's also an ability to release mist gas into the layer to try to suffocate people. Like, what is he doing? Like, defecating into the vents? Or is he throwing some killer mustard gas? What is it? You can see those things throughout this episode where it feels just randomly inserted there, or just padded events to kind of trot the story along. Especially with the adults in certain scenes, like I said, with Drake falling asleep during a loud movie, and a choking mist that just feels random. That's what I would think this episode has majorly for its negatives. It's just that it just comes off so random, and everything's just skimmed through. What is Big Yellow is never really elaborated on, and I kind of like it that way, that we don't know what it is. It's alluded to be like this prehistoric marsupial creature, monster even. It's alluded to be a monster. It's alluded to be a guy in a mascot costume. If you've seen the end scene with the twist at the very end, I'm not going to spoil it, but it could be something completely different that we have never seen before. So I don't know what to make of Big Yellow as a character. Like, what is it? Good food for thought, though. There was supposed to be a follow-up episode to this, and it's been well documented that if the show would have continued, Mascot would have gotten a sequel episode. I would have hoped that in that sequel episode they would have tied up some loose ends that this episode had. But yeah, I love this episode on one hand, but there's so many questionable things that I can't wrap my head around that I have to poke at them, because I don't think it, even like some of the more middle of the road Goosebumps episodes with 20 to 22 minute episodes would have stuff that glaring, unless it was already an evident issue in the book that they just didn't want to correct. Very, very less often you would see the writing team create those issues in the Goosebumps show from their own ideas of changes in the script. But this being a brand new story, like made for the show, given that it's basing, its inspiration on the short story adaptations, I can't be too harsh on it. But it does just skip over a lot of important things I think should have been there. And I'm not saying this story should have been padded out to be a two-parter. It does not need to be a two-parter. But for some reason, it's just one of those episodes that I think, like, if just certain scenes were tweaked to add more exposition, or maybe some darker layers to kind of make up for its weaknesses, or maybe just 30 seconds of explanation even, it would have fixed a lot of contextual issues I have with the episode. And that's really all the issues I have. It's just a lot of the context is just jumbled and comes off random and like padding. So from a 0 to 5 stars, like I said, with the dumb adults, some scenes that are very contrived and padded and drive the story forward, and some things that just come off completely random, like the mist thing, I collectively deducted 0.7 off. And I didn't go too hard on it because this episode is actually genuinely scary and creepy, so I decided to be nicer to it and give it more credit where it had strengths. So I give this about a 4.3 out of 5. I think this is a middle to high B of an episode in kids' horror story. I really dug this. If you have never watched Mascot, I highly recommend that you watch this because this is a very unique feeling story. It's very creative. It's wildly fun. Yeah, I would definitely rewatch this. Maybe not in the same way as I first watched it. I've seen this a few times, but just go into it the first time without, any expectations, and I think you'll have a lot of fun. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Mascot episode from The Haunting Hour. Let me know down in the comment section if you have watched this episode. Did you love this or did you hate this? I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.